Hello, I'm Jessica Blessing-Patterson with DIG Annuals and Perennials, and today we're doing a video for Seed St. Louis to help folks to root some perennial herbs in your home. So today we're going to focus on Mediterranean herbs because oftentimes these herbs kind of struggle in our Missouri winters. It's a little too cold and a little too wet for them. So if you can do cuttings this time of year, sometimes you can keep those plants in your house through the winter months and then you can replant them the following spring and you don't have to worry about the plants that you have outside dying off in the winter time. So the first thing that you need a few different things to do these cuttings. The first thing that you need to think about is your rooting medium. So this is the material that you're going to be using to root your plants in. I don't recommend using any old potting soil. It tends to stay a little bit too wet and your cuttings are more likely to rot before they make new roots. So what I use is a 50-50 mix of coconut coir, which comes in blocks, you rehydrate it, and perlite. Now, if you can't find these materials or if you don't have these materials, you can use potting mix, but it's important that you add something else to it to increase the drainage. This can be perlite, that's one that I like a lot, but you can also use pea gravel, or you can use turfus, which is a silica product that kind of absorbs some of that excess moisture. So that's really important. Make sure you have a really good mix that drains really sharply. The next thing you need, and you don't actually have to have this, but I do recommend it. I just have a lot better results when I use rooting hormone. So you have a couple of different options. You can get this powdered rooting hormone at your local nursery, and it's just a white powder that you're going to dip the end of your cutting into. Or you can use this liquid rooting hormone that you can order online, and some garden centers may carry it as well. And it's just a liquid. Again, I think they both work really well, so it's up to you, whatever you want to choose. And then you want a container for each variety. I don't recommend putting more than one variety in each pot because it can be easy to get them confused. All right, now the plants that I have today, I've got lavender. This is a Munstead type lavender. I do recommend Munstead types because they tend to do really well for us here in St. Louis. Some of the other varieties of lavender can be a little bit more finicky and just don't like our heavy soils. And then we have rosemary. This is not any kind of special rosemary. There are lots of really cool varieties out there, and certainly if you have some of those cool varieties, it's absolutely worth doing cuttings so you can make sure that you have a continued supply of those herbs. So first things first, let's fill our container with our rooting media. A pot for each kind here. Now, the next thing we're going to do is take our cuttings. If you have a shoot that has flowered, you can use it, but you want to make sure that you remove the flower. Now, I will say that I have better luck rooting stems that haven't produced a flower. So the one next door to this one here is going to be a lot better contender. Now, these cuttings are called a semi-hardwood cutting, okay? So that means that the growth is from this year, but it's old enough that it has kind of a woody texture to it. It's no longer super flexible, it's kind of stiffened up, and usually the color changes a little bit to kind of a brownish bark color. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the leaves from the bottom of my cutting. So anything that goes below the soil, you want to make sure you don't have any leaves on it, because those leaves will just rot and fall off and can cause fungal issues for you in the rooting process. Now, I'm going to take several cuttings because I've got such a nice large pot here. Okay. And I'll just strip those lower leaves off of all of them. Now the other thing I wanted to mention is that right now is a really good time to prune those woody Mediterranean herbs like rosemary and lavender, especially lavender. If your lavender has bloomed, you want to go ahead and remove all of those spent blooms so that it doesn't put all of its energy into producing seeds. And that way you'll have a better chance at getting a rebloom on your lavender. And it also helps to keep your plant a more manageable size and shape. Okay, so I've got my cuttings here. Now I've removed quite a bit of the foliage on them, but I've left just a few leaves here at the end. Okay, we don't want to leave too many leaves because that just takes away energy from our cutting. Now, I'm going to use the liquid for this one, and I'll just dip the end of my stem in the liquid. You don't want too much on there. And then when I stick the cutting into my rooting medium, I'm going to do it around the outside of the pot. Now, for these Mediterranean herbs, this is especially important. What this does is it keeps the cuttings from getting too wet. So there's a little bit more airflow around the outside of the pot as opposed to the inside. Okay, so the inside is going to stay, maintain a higher level of moisture, and with cuttings, we really don't want them to be too wet. Okay, and so I can go all the way around the edge of my pot, and then I'm going to label it, and I'm going to water it well. Now, for this time of year, it's great because we can put our cuttings outside, and I'm sure that you all know lavender is a full sun plant, but for these cuttings, I don't want to put them right out into the direct sun. About a half a day of sun is best. If you can do morning sun, that's absolutely the best, but if all you have is afternoon sun, that's fine too. And just make sure that you water them once every 2 or 3 days. You don't want them to dry out completely, but you also just don't want them soaking wet, okay? And then we're going to do pretty much the same thing with our rosemary. I don't have quite as many plants here. And the other thing I wanted to mention, my rosemary is a little bit green, okay? So this would be called a green cutting, and that's fresh new growth. This time of year that can work, but I have better luck with cuttings from plants that are a little bit more woody. So I've got this lovely plant back here. I'm going to take a couple cuttings from it as well because it's just a bit more woody. And so we'll be able to see if we get better cuttings from that. And you can see the difference here. These are my green cuttings, and these are my older, more woody cuttings of rosemary. Okay. Now, for the powdered rooting hormone, the process is the same. The only thing I think it's really important to mention is that you want to be sure that you tap off the excess rooting hormone. You really don't want, more is not necessarily better, okay? So just give them a little dip in the rooting hormone and insert them in there, right around the edge of your pot. Okay. Then I'm going to label my pot, water it in, and I'm good to go. A couple things I want to mention is that you're going to get rooting much better for these woody plants at the node. So if we look at a stem, the node is simply where anything is growing out of the stem. So in this case, it would be leaves. So here where I've pulled off leaves, that's where I'm going to see rooting, okay? It's right here at these nodes. So it's really important that I have at least 1, 2, 3, 4 nodes under the soil is even better, okay? So for my cuttings, I want them to be a minimum 3 inches, maximum probably 4 to 5 inches, all right? So you want them pretty short, and as I said, just make sure that you're not leaving too many leaves on there because that makes it a little bit harder for the cutting to maintain the moisture in those leaves. And I think that's pretty much it. You just want to make sure that you don't let them dry out, but then don't overwater. And you should have rooting in 2 to 3 weeks. Once you start to see little roots sticking out of the bottom of your pot, then you know it's time to dump out your pot and split them up, and you can pot them on individually and make sure that you have a nice south-facing window to keep them in through the winter months, and then next spring, you're ready to go.